Hello everyone. Today, I will continue telling you the story of the single mother, Tusan. I hope you enjoy the video. Hoai's company gradually entered its official operational phase. The plans that had once existed only on paper were now turning into concrete tasks, one after another, without pause. Hoai almost buried himself in thick stacks of documents, from legal procedures, partnership contracts, and business licenses to the smallest details of personnel and finance. He understood clearly that even a minor mistake at this stage could lead to serious complications later on, so everything had to be done carefully, thoroughly, and with absolute certainty. During those days, Hoai's schedule was packed with hardly a moment to spare. He left early in the morning and came home late at night. Some evenings, when he returned, the lights in the house were already off. Tusan would leave him a reheated meal and a small note on the table. Eat well and keep yourself warm. Don't overwork. Those few simple words often left Hoai standing there in silence for a long time. He knew he had been spending less time with Tusan. The evenings they once shared, sitting together, eating dinner, chatting about nothing in particular, had become rare. Sometimes, amid the relentless rush of work, Hoai felt a sudden pang of guilt when he thought of the woman who was quietly waiting for him behind it all. But every time that feeling arose, Tusan never made it heavier for him. Tusan understood. She understood that these busy days were not because Hoai was careless or indifferent, but because he was carrying an entire future on his shoulders, a future he had worked so hard to reach. She never complained, never showed resentment. Instead, she took it upon herself to keep the house more organized, to look after his meals and his rest. Whenever Hoai returned home exhausted, she would simply ask gently, "Was today okay?" Just one simple question, yet it was enough to make Hoai feel understood and quietly strengthened. There were nights when Hoai called late, his voice heavy with fatigue. Before he could say much, Tusan would already smile and say, "Just focus on your work. I've got things covered at home." To Hoai, those words were not just encouragement. They were a solid anchor, a place he could lean on and draw strength from to keep moving forward. Tusan chose to stand behind Hoai, silently becoming his support. She believed in the path he was walking, believed in everything he was building with all his heart. To her, love was not about demanding to be together every single day, but about being willing to wait, willing to stay, so that when Hoai looked back, he would know there was always someone who truly understood and trusted him without reservation. Not long after, Hoai's company began to show its first positive signs. The first major contract was signed smoothly, and the legal procedures that had plagued him for so long finally fell into a stable rhythm. When he signed his name on the last page, Hoai instinctively let out a long breath. In that moment, he didn't think about profits, reputation, or future status. The clearest image in his mind was Tusan. He remembered coming home late to a quiet but always warm and tidy house. He remembered the simple meals prepared in advance, the short messages filled with care. Hoai suddenly realized that throughout the time he had been working like a machine, Tusan had quietly kept his life from falling into chaos. She never pushed him, never blamed him, she simply stood behind him, allowing him to move forward with full focus and peace of mind. That evening, Hoai came home earlier than usual. Tusan was slightly surprised to see him at the door at an hour she had never thought possible. Hoai didn't say much. He just stood there, looking at her for a long moment, his eyes filled with fatigue mixed with relief. When Tusan turned toward him, before she could ask anything, Hoai spoke softly, his voice low and slow. "I signed the contract." Tusan smiled, a very gentle smile, yet her eyes lit up with unmistakable joy. She didn't cheer or ask questions. She simply stepped closer and said quietly, "That's good. I knew you could do it." Just that one sentence made Hoai feel as though his chest tightened. He suddenly understood that the success he had just reached was not only the result of sleepless nights and endless running around, but also because there had been someone behind him who believed in him, even when he himself had not yet fully believed. Hoai reached out and held Tusan's hand, for the first time in a long while without rushing, without being chased by work. During this time, I've left you alone too much, he said softly. Tusan shook her head, her voice gentle. You're building your future. I just did what I could. But to Hai, those words carried a much deeper meaning. He understood that Tusan's what I could was exactly the foundation that allowed him to stand firm today. In that rare, peaceful moment, Hai silently promised himself that no matter how far his work took him, no matter how long and challenging the road ahead might be, he would not let the woman who had been his quiet support stand alone for too long ever again. The upcoming new project required Hai to travel abroad and work directly with overseas partners. It was a crucial step if he wanted the company not only to remain within the domestic market, but to truly expand further. The planned schedule would last about a month, not an overly long time, yet for Hai, the thought of being away from Tusan for that many days still weighed heavily on his heart. All day long, Hai carried that concern with him. He knew the trip was necessary, a rare opportunity, but he couldn't help feeling sad at the thought of temporarily leaving behind the woman who had been by his side throughout the journey so far. That evening, Tusan prepared a more elaborate meal than usual. The dishes on the table were carefully chosen, not only delicious, but also nourishing. She wanted Hai to have enough strength for the demanding days ahead. The warm atmosphere of the meal, the gentle aroma of food filling the small kitchen, seemed to slow everything down. Hai ate more slowly than usual. When the meal was almost over, he set his chopsticks down, took a deep breath, and said, "There's something I want to tell you." Tusan looked up at him, her gaze calm yet full of concern. Hai slowly explained the new project, the plan to go abroad for about a month to personally discuss and finalize important steps for the company. His voice grew lower toward the end, regret clearly visible in his eyes. Tusan was silent for a few seconds. In that brief moment, a faint sadness passed through her eyes. A month apart was not something she wished for. But then she smiled, the familiar, gentle smile. She reached out, took Hai's hand, and squeezed it lightly, as if passing her reassurance to him. "Go without worry," Tusan said, her voice soft yet steady. "This is a good opportunity. Do your very best." Hai looked at her, emotions intertwining in his chest. "I'm afraid of leaving you here alone for so long." Tusan shook her head, still holding his hand tightly. "I can wait. Even if it takes longer, I'll still wait for you to come back." Those words made Hai tighten his grip on her hand. In that quiet moment, he understood that behind every step forward he took, there was someone willing to wait, willing to trust, without conditions. And because of that, the upcoming journey, no matter how far, felt steadier than ever. The night before Hai's departure, the house was quieter than usual. Outside, the wind brushed softly through the trees, carrying a faint chill of late night. In the living room, Hai's suitcase sat neatly in the corner, zipped shut. A clear reminder that the temporary farewell was very close. The two of them sat side by side on the sofa. No television. No phones. Just the soft yellow light overhead, warm enough to slow every emotion. Tusan folded the last shirt and placed it into Hai's carry-on bag, her movements careful, as if she were tucking all her concern into every crease of fabric. Hai watched her for a long time. "I keep feeling like this trip will make me miss so many things," he said quietly. Tusan looked up and smiled gently. "You're only gone for a month." Then she paused, her voice slowing. "But I understand." Hai let out a soft breath. "I'm afraid that while I'm gone, you'll have to handle everything on your own." Tusan set the shirt down and turned to take his hand. "I'm used to it. And besides, I know you're going for your future, and for ours too." She squeezed his hand gently, her eyes steady. "Go with peace of mind. I'll be here, waiting for you." Silence stretched between them. Not heavy enough to suffocate, but deep enough for both to clearly feel the longing already beginning to form, even before they were apart. That night, they talked for a long time. About work, about plans after Hai returned, about small things like the meal they would cook when he came home, or the short trip they had promised each other long ago. No grand promises were made, yet every word carried a very real sense of closeness. The next morning, the airport was crowded but not as noisy as Hai had imagined. Tusan stood beside him, holding tightly onto the strap of her bag. She wore a light jacket, her face calm, though her eyes couldn't hide her reluctance to part. Hai pulled his suitcase, glancing at Tusan from time to time, as if trying to memorize every moment. When they reached the check-in area, he stopped and set the suitcase down. "I'm going now," Hai said, his voice low. Tusan nodded and smiled. "Take good care of yourself. Eat properly, and don't overwork." Hai smiled softly and reached out to gently brush her hair. "I'll call you every day." Tusan didn't say anything else. She simply stepped forward and hugged him, lightly, yet tightly. In that embrace, words felt unnecessary. There was only the familiar heartbeat, only the feeling of not wanting to let go too soon. When Hai turned and walked away, Tusan stood still, watching him. She didn't cry. She only lifted her hand in a small wave, her eyes following him until his figure blended into the crowd ahead. In her heart, a faint emptiness rose, mixed with a firm belief that the man she was waiting for would return, more mature, more grounded, and still the Hai she loved. That evening, after seeing Hai off, Tusan returned home with a deep sense of emptiness. The familiar house suddenly felt larger than usual, so quiet that even the smallest sounds echoed clearly. She reheated the leftover meal, ate a few bites absent-mindedly, then turned on the television, as if trying to fill the silence slowly spreading inside her. The evening news went on steadily, the news anchor's voice familiar and even. Tusan leaned back in her chair, holding a cup of warm water, her eyes drifting aimlessly across the screen. Then the voice suddenly lowered, becoming more serious than usual. "A plane crash has just been reported." Tusan's heart tightened. She straightened up, her eyes locked onto the screen. The aircraft, flight number, was on its journey. The words that followed struck her mind like heavy blows. It was the very flight carrying Hai on his business trip. The cup slipped from Tusan's fingers without her noticing, shattering against the floor. The sharp sound rang out, but she seemed unable to hear anything anymore. Her whole body began to tremble, her breath catching, her heart pounding so wildly it hurt. "No, that can't be," Tusan whispered, her voice breaking. She sprang to her feet, her legs weak and unsteady. Her mind went blank, every thought erased, leaving only one name echoing over and over, Hai. Tusan grabbed her phone in a panic. Her fingers trembled so badly that she had to dial the number several times before getting it right. She pressed the phone to her ear, holding her breath, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. One ring. Then two. But all that answered was the cold, endless tone of beep, beep. No familiar voice. No response. She called again. And then a third time. With every unanswered ring, her heart sank a little further, as if each beat were falling into an endless void. Her hand clenched the phone so tightly it turned pale, and without her realizing when, tears streamed down, dripping onto the cold screen. She stood frozen in the middle of the house, surrounded by the shards of the broken cup, by the glow of the television that continued to broadcast the news calmly, as if unaware that someone's world had just collapsed. In that moment, all Tusan could do was whisper in despair. Hi, please answer, please. After so many unanswered calls, Tusan let her arm fall limp, the phone slipping into her cold palm. She sank down onto the chair, her back against the dining table, her vacant gaze drifting toward the television, which had already moved on to another story. All the sounds around her seemed to fade away, leaving only the heavy, erratic pounding of her heart in her chest. She didn't cry right away. Instead, a hollow emptiness spread through her body, as if something essential had been torn away. She didn't know what frightened her more, the possibility that the news was true, or the unbearable silence with no explanation. She stood up, then sat back down, took a few steps across the living room, then stopped midway. Every movement felt disconnected, without purpose. She opened the window for fresh air, then closed it again almost immediately, suddenly feeling cold despite the still night. Inside her mind, thoughts piled on top of one another, chaotic and impossible to grasp. Maybe he's still on the plane and can't answer. Maybe the signal is weak over there. Or maybe... Tusan didn't dare continue. Each time a dark thought flashed through her mind, she forced herself to stop, as if merely thinking it might make it come true. She glanced at the clock. The second hand moved unbearably slowly. Each minute felt like an hour. Tusan picked up her phone again, her hands trembling slightly, then set it back down. She was afraid to call again, afraid of hearing the same emptiness, afraid of feeling that crushing disappointment one more time. In the quiet house, Tusan curled up on the chair, hugging her knees to her chest. The yellow light cast her small shadow onto the cold tile floor. She tried to breathe deeply, tried to calm herself, but her chest ached with every breath, as if something heavy were pressing down, refusing to lift. She didn't know what to do next. She didn't know what to believe, or how long she would have to wait. All she knew was that in that moment, anxiety had taken over her mind completely, pulling her into an exhausting state of restlessness, where every passing second became a test. And in the midst of that uncertainty, all Tusan could do was cling tightly to the phone in her hand, as if it were the last fragile thread connecting her to Hai, waiting for a sign, even the smallest one, to know that he was still safe. Tusan didn't dare continue. Each time a dark thought flashed through her mind, she forced herself to stop, as if merely thinking it might make it come true. She glanced at the clock. The second hand moved unbearably slowly. Each minute felt like an hour. Tusan picked up her phone again, her hands trembling slightly, then set it back down. She was afraid to call again, afraid of hearing the same emptiness, afraid of feeling that crushing disappointment one more time. In the quiet house, Tusan curled up on the chair, hugging her knees to her chest. The yellow light cast her small shadow onto the cold tile floor. She tried to breathe deeply, tried to calm herself, but her chest ached with every breath, as if something heavy were pressing down, refusing to lift. She didn't know what to do next. She didn't know what to believe, or how long she would have to wait. All she knew was that in that moment, anxiety had taken over her mind completely, pulling her into an exhausting state of restlessness, where every passing second became a test. And in the midst of that uncertainty, all Tusan could do was cling tightly to the phone in her hand, as if it were the last fragile thread connecting her to Hai, waiting for a sign, even the smallest one, to know that he was still safe. The phone in Tusan's hand suddenly vibrated. She startled, her heart seeming to stop for a brief moment. On the screen appeared the familiar name, Hai. In that instant, Tusan could barely breathe. Trembling, she lifted the phone to her ear. Before she could say anything, Hai's voice came through, urgent and filled with concern. "San, you answered? Are you okay?" Just hearing his voice was enough to make every wall Tusan had struggled to hold up collapse at once. She burst into tears, sobbing uncontrollably, her voice breaking apart. "Hai. I was so scared. I kept calling you but couldn't reach you." There was a brief silence on the other end, then Hai let out a heavy breath, his voice lowering with guilt. "I'm sorry. I was still on the plane then. As soon as we landed, I heard the news. I knew you'd be worried, so I called you right away." Tusan raised a hand to cover her mouth, trying to stifle her sobs but failing. All the anxiety, restlessness, and fear that had built up throughout the evening now poured out with every broken breath. The news said, "A plane crashed, on the same route," she said in fragments, her voice choking. "I know," Hai replied immediately, his tone firm, as if to steady her. "But it wasn't my flight. I'm safe. You don't have to be scared anymore." Hearing the word safe, Tusan finally felt her body go weak. She sank back into the chair, still clutching the phone tightly, as if letting go might make everything disappear again. "You scared me too," Hai said softly, his voice gentler now. "When I was on the plane, I had no idea. The moment I landed and heard the news, you were the only thing I thought about." Tusan cried for a little longer before slowly calming down. She wiped her tears, took a deep breath, her voice still trembling but lighter. As long as you're safe, that's all that matters. I'm okay. On the other end of the line, Hai was quiet for a moment, then said slowly. I promise, from now on, wherever I land, the first thing I'll do is call you. Tusan nodded slightly, even though she knew he couldn't see her. The fear still lingered in her heart, but it was now replaced by a relief so overwhelming it almost made her laugh through tears. A call that came a little late, yet enough to pull her back from the edge of panic, enough to remind her that the man she was waiting for was safe, and that she was the first person on his mind. That night, Tusan sat by the window for a long time, her phone placed close beside her. The worry hadn't completely faded, but her heart had found its anchor again, the familiar voice that had returned just in time. After she had calmed down more, Tusan took a deep breath, trying to let her voice return to its usual gentle tone. She wiped her tears and softly reminded him. Make sure you eat properly. Don't skip meals just because you're busy. It's colder over there, so take care of yourself and don't catch a cold. Hai listened to every word, the corner of his lips lifting slightly. Even though thousands of kilometers lay between them, he could still clearly feel that familiar concern, the kind that softened his heart after a long day of travel. I know, Hai replied, his voice low and warm. You take care of yourself too. Don't stay up too late at home. Tusan smiled through her tears. They didn't exchange any grand promises, only quiet, everyday reminders, simple and familiar, yet strangely soothing. The call ended late. Tusan set her phone down and leaned back in her chair, the emptiness she had felt earlier now much gentler. She still missed him, still worried, but knowing that Hai was safe, that he was there and thinking of her, that was enough to carry her through the long night. Somewhere else, Hai returned to his hotel after the call. The unfamiliar room, lit by white lights, felt a little cold. He set his suitcase down, sat on the edge of the bed, and took out his phone, opening his photo gallery. The screen filled with Tusan's face in ordinary, intimate moments, her soft smile in the kitchen, her sitting by the window reading, her quiet gaze when she looked at him without saying a word. Hai scrolled slowly through each photo, his heart warming in a very tangible way. He suddenly realized that no matter how far he traveled, just thinking about Tusan made all the exhaustion fade. The longing didn't weigh him down, instead, it became a gentle source of strength. Hai smiled softly to himself. He placed the phone beside his pillow and closed his eyes. In that unfamiliar room, the image of Tusan made him feel anything but alone. And for the first time since leaving, Hai slept well, carrying with him a quiet warmth and a tender, very real joy about the woman waiting for him at home. In the early days abroad, even though Hai's work schedule was quite demanding, he always made time to call Tusan every evening. Some calls lasted only a few minutes, others a bit longer, but somehow they became an indispensable habit for both of them. Hai told Tusan about the city he was staying in, the wide, clean streets, the hurried yet orderly flow of people, the meetings that stretched late into the night and left him utterly exhausted. He talked about his partners, the pressure of having to perform well in every discussion, and even the small moments, like struggling to find a meal that suited his taste in a foreign place. Tusan listened attentively. She didn't interrupt, only asking a few well-timed questions when needed. When Hai complained of being tired, she gently reminded him to rest. When he spoke of a meeting that went well, she shared his happiness, her voice filled with pride even as she tried to hide it. In return, Tusan told Hai about the simplest things at home. The meal she cooked that day turned out a bit too salty, an unexpected afternoon rain, the familiar street in front of the house being busier than usual. Those small, seemingly insignificant stories somehow made Hai feel that he still belonged there, that he was still a part of Tusan's life. Some evenings, after finishing their stories, they would fall silent for a few seconds, and then Hai would laugh. Just hearing you talk like that makes me feel like I'm already home. Tusan laughed softly in response, her voice gentle. Just focus on doing your best at work. Everything's fine here. I'm here, waiting for you. Their calls ended when both were tired, yet neither felt empty. Because even across the distance, they shared the smallest fragments of their everyday lives. And it was precisely those simple moments that shortened the distance between them, turning longing into something lighter, a quiet, steady bond that flowed gently through each day they spent apart.
Xin chào mọi người, chào mừng mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình và lắng nghe câu chuyện hôm nay mình chia sẻ. Chúc mọi người có một ngày mới vui vẻ, hạnh phúc và một ngày làm việc tràn đầy năng lượng. Hy vọng rằng những video của mình chia sẻ sẽ giúp mọi người thư giãn sau những giờ làm việc căng thẳng. Và nếu yêu thích những video của mình thì nhớ bấm nút theo dõi và bật thông báo để nhận thông báo khi mình đăng video mới nhất, để những video mới mọi người có thể xem và không bị bỏ lỡ. Và câu chuyện Tiểu San mình chia sẻ cho mọi người thì thường được phát hành vào khung giờ 7 giờ tối và 7 giờ sáng tại Việt Nam. Thì mọi người nhớ chú ý đón xem và ủng hộ kênh cho mình nha. Cảm ơn mọi người đã lắng nghe hết một phút chia sẻ của mình. Hẹn gặp lại mọi người ở những video tiếp theo nha.